Welcome to the Erasing Shame Podcast, Season 1. This podcast is about erasing shame through honest talk for healthy living, emotionally, relationally, mentally, and personally. Visit our website at erasingshame.com for links to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe on iTunes and YouTube. Now, let's have an honest talk for healthy living. Hello, welcome to Erasing Shame Podcast, where we have honest talk for healthy living. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about sex. And so a parental advisory. This is a conversation that we are having that will involve adulting kind of topics. So listen to this with discretion. My name is DJ Chuang, and I'm joined with Roy Kim, who is a therapist in the Orange County area. Roy was a burnt-out pastor at a very low point in his life, and his wife loved another man, and he hated God. Yet God never abandoned him and instead gave Roy a new legacy, and he now counsels those suffering from sex addiction, betrayal trauma, and divorce devastation. His counseling practice is now called New Legacy Counseling Services, and in July, he'll be remarrying a wonderful woman and becoming an overjoyed stepdad. Congratulations, Roy. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks, DJ. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, so we have about half an hour to talk about a very big topic. And I don't know what it is about our humanity, our human condition, but we are obsessed with sex. And I think in our digital age, in this internet age, that has only accelerated it and highlighted it even more and more than ever. So let's start with help introducing your story a little bit more to our listeners and viewers. When did you discover that shame was something that you had to deal with those really hard things that you went through in your life?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think that I was cognizant really of what shame was. I just experienced a ton of isolation. I think I remember what Dr. Lisa said in the previous episode about how I think her definition of shame was, to paraphrase, like the things that you don't talk about. Right. That you don't want to share. Mm-hmm. And for sure, me being a pastor and being betrayed by my spouse and trying to make sense of it all and, coming to grips with a real feeling that I think my life was over, And so you try to wrestle with that, but nothing really makes sense. And at a time like that, you kind of feel that you're alone, that you don't really want to share with people because you wonder whether they would understand or you wonder what their response would be like. So, to be a pastor and to have that kind of devastation, it did a number on my faith in him as well. I had certain expectations of how life worked. I had expectations of how he would tend to me or how he would care for me. And when I didn't feel like he would protect me from devastation like that, I just kind of throw up my hands and say, why even bother? So with all these things that I mentioned, plus probably a dozen more, I just went into isolation. And, in my isolation, that's where I had like binge drinking, sex addiction came, more into play, just anything that I can do to numb the pain. And I avoided church, avoided anything that had to do with, God or the Bible or, that kind of thing. Just basically active rebellion against him. And you get to a point where you realize that, even though I'm living secretly, over time, I realized through certain encounters that these secrets get surfaced, and you can't keep these secrets anymore. And so if you can't keep the secrets anymore, then you're just sort of confronted with what we're talking about today, which is shame.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So in the midst of that pain, and you try to find some things that would soothe the pain or mask the pain, what changed in your life that you began to look for healing instead of hiding and move towards healthy living?
It took a long time.
Like how long is long?
Years.
Mm.
I would say
Wow.
it probably came about in stages.
Mm.
I think the foundation piece for me being able to like I don't know, not necessarily have my legs yet. I think people were supporting me, but I think the safest foundation I had during that time was actually the cohort that I was a part of for my MFT graduate work.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not my church. I was not really going to a church, but most of these people were Christian. But the way that they lived out their faith and the way that they had conversations with one another in the cohort was um, it was Christ-like. In not the Christ-like that I used to think of, which is kind of like, you got to be perfect all the time, but Christ-like in its understanding and its grace. The conversations that they had with me were just so full of compassion and non-judgment. And I think even though I didn't have a transformation during that time, I think that was the beginning part of it. But like I said, it took years. I removed myself from Southern California because that's where most of my memories of my trauma was. And I think I needed that geographic separation to get my bearings. And I think it was during my internship when I was up in the Bay Area where day in, day out, I was working with other interns and other supervisors who were similar to my cohort in that they were so full of grace and so full of understanding. And, a person who I interviewed for my podcast said that she said that one of the healing things for her was that people didn't, hurry her along in her process. And I felt that about these people up north, is that they didn't hurry me along, but rather they just were with me no matter what, and over time, years and years, I'd say 3 years at the minimum, I was able to confront the shame eventually and to be able to accept myself and accept life and accept maybe the beginning invitations of God to give me a new legacy for my life. So yeah, it took a long time.
Yeah, and when you say that they were with you and patient with you, it sounded like they gave you a safe place to just be yourself, and
Exactly
they didn't
right.
judge you, and they accepted you, and they showed kindness to you, and that really helped you to begin to realize just numbing your pain wasn't a good way to just live.
Yeah, and they weren't the type who said you should do this or you should do that. It's just really like, how are you doing? And as I shared as honestly as I could, they said, yeah, that's really understandable. Is there anything that I can do, that could be helpful for you? Sharing meals together, whatever. But they never were the type who were trying to rush me out of what I was going through, and that was really helpful for me.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine if I went through just one of the 3 difficult things that you went through, I would want to hide. I would want to move to the Midwest and work at McDonald's and just try to live my life very quietly.
Anonymously.
I'm a little surprised that you're able to continue in grad school and that you didn't lose your faith. I mean, when something like that happens, it would be very easy to lose your faith. And I know we have viewers and listeners that have faith and those that do not have faith, but they're part of this conversation because they're part of our human condition. And so, how did you make that turn? How did you do that?
How did I do that? I guess the church answer
Was
is
it the light?
Jesus.
Was the light? did the light come on? Like you said,
Yeah.
in a moment of numbing the pain, you said,
Yeah.
"I don't want this anymore."
Yeah. I'll tell you a short story.
Mm.
You know, I was so bitter at God. Months and years worth of just bitterness towards him. And the prevailing thought was, why did you do this to me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why did you not protect me? Don't you care? How could you, how could you jack me like this, right? And so because that anger was always there in my heart, my soul, it was cancerous, for me. And there came a point up in the Bay Area where one of the fellow therapists in my counseling center, she was an art therapist, and she told me about some of the work that she does. And it was interesting to me, like, how the usage of art can be used to create insight, to create maybe movement in your progress towards a particular goal, because it accesses a different part of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I was curious about it, and so I took a plunge and I bought some used paints and some canvases, and I don't really know where I was going with it, but I just started painting on a canvas and just seeing where it went. And eventually I landed upon drawing the face of an angel who was looking at my trauma. So an angel from in heaven looking down upon my situation. And I tell people this a lot, that art doesn't lie. Whether it's a novice like myself or a real full-fledged artist, when you're drawing or painting, you'll just keep on making corrections until it says and expresses what you want it to express. You can't be satisfied until that happens. It doesn't lie, right? It doesn't lie about what's really going inside the heart. So as I was drawing it, I kept on making corrections, and then finally the end product was this angel, the eyes full of fire and tears, as it was looking at my situation. And in that moment, I had this aha awakening that, wait a second, God is looking, represented in the angel, God is looking at me, and not in a I don't care kind of way, but rather he's torn up kind of way. He's devastated as he's looking at what happened, and he's angry. And for me, why that was revolutionary is because this whole time I thought that God didn't care. In fact, that, I had all these prayers that I wanted answered and he wasn't answering them. And I just interpreted that as he just doesn't care. But to know in my head and feel in my heart that he was just as devastated as I was meant that he was actually on my side. And that opened the door for me to start to accept the fact that maybe he had other plans. And my therapist at the time told me that my ex-wife has her own will. She has her own agency. And God, for whatever reason, allows people to have free agency. And when I accept that, that's when my healing can start to take place. And in that moment, I think that's when I realized that, yes, she had her free agency, her free will, and God was devastated by her choices. But he's a type of God who cares about what I'm going through. And so he will then walk with me through this pain into the path of healing. And that was, I think that was really the most significant turnaround for me in my emotional healing and my spiritual healing as well.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. Now, let's talk about the sex part.
Let's talk about sex.
So, what is it with people's obsession about sex?
Yeah.
And there's a quest for pleasure. There's the procreation, how to reproduce part, and then now we're in this midst of gender identity and all kinds of sexual variety and liberation. And then there's the dark side of harassment and abuse and human trafficking. So what's so bad about sex, and how do you know when you've crossed the line into sex addiction?
Yeah, sex is it's a fascinating thing. I think sex is great. I think it is one of the yeah, right. It is
Yes.
one of the best things in life, and yet when sex is perverted, it is one of the most devastating things in life. You think about affairs. You think about the shame that happens, with like politicians and their scandals, right? The careers are ruined, families are ruined because of sexual perversions. Whether it's believer or non-believer alike, there's something innate within us that when we are in a sexual relationship with someone, there's something, I don't know, something otherworldly that happens when sex enters the picture.
Yes.
And something sacred. And so the sense of betrayal that one feels, even when someone is like dating and having sex, and you realize that this person had sex with another person, or even like virtual sex with like pornography or whatever it is, there's just something that hits the soul so hard that it's unmistakable. I think it's just innate in all of us. And so, yeah, sex is so powerful. It's so wonderful. It does, like you said, it allows us to have children. But it's got such potential for devastation when it's not, I guess, applied the right way. I dare I say right way, right?
Yeah, you've touched on this other dimension that people may not realize when they're just caught up in the excitement of it. That's far more than emotional and physical.
Oh yeah.
And there's that intangible part that just really drilled down into our very depth of being. And
definitely. Let's say someone is dating, and let's say they had sex with one person one night, and let's just say that your typical person just believes that sex is just sex, right? But then let's say you find out that the person that you had sex with, I don't know, the next hour or the next morning had sex with another person. Like all of a sudden, what you thought was a great moment in time is now tainted, and it's cheapened, and there's something in the soul that gets struck, because if we're honest with ourselves, it's not just sex. There's something otherworldly about it that bonds people together, and I think it was meant to be committal with two people, and not multiple people. That's just I don't see any other way around that.
Yeah. So then, what is sex addiction?
Yeah.
And how does counseling help?
Okay. Yeah, sex addiction is similar to other addictions in that there's certain criteria that needs to be met for it to count as a clinical addiction. One of the criteria is like a built-up tolerance to it. Like it escalates. For example, let's say you are, one aspect of sex addiction is like pornography viewing, right? Okay. So let's say you are watching porn. Let's say you stumble upon it, and you're like, oh shoot, like what am I doing? I should shut this down. And so that first initial contact with it was like 10 seconds long, but then let's say you get curious about it again, as most people are. And that 10 seconds becomes a minute the next time. And then a minute turns into 5 minutes the next time. And then you get hooked on that the feelings that rush into you as you're viewing the porn, that now the 5 minutes needs to be 5 minutes every hour, or 5 minutes becomes 1 hour, or it just keeps on escalating until the point where the amount that you used to intake it, or the amount that you used to, experience it with another person, is not enough anymore. You need something longer. You need to be more intense. You need to be more kinky, like more violent. Whatever it is, it needs to be escalated. That's one thing. There needs to be also like attempts to stop it, and these attempts are unsuccessful. Like, for example, okay, I realize I can't do this anymore. I'm going to stop, but then let's say a week later you're back on it again. So continuous failed attempts is also an indication that addiction's in play. There's like withdrawal, like when you are away from it, when you're abstaining from it, there's something that happens within you, like you get irritable, you lack focus, you feel like you got to have it. It's almost like you lose control. You've got to have it to have some semblance of control in your life again. Consequences, like you start to lose relationships because of it. You lose a job because of it. You lose time because of it. So that's when these are just a few of the markers, but that's when you know that you're now entering into addiction territory. And this is very similar to gambling, to substance abuse, to anything, like all the withdrawal symptoms, the escalation, the loss of the consequences that come with it. All these things are very similar in the same family of addictions.
Wow. So when life goes out of control, some people approach you for help. And how has your expertise and your experience been helpful for people to get their life back?
Yeah, I find it's a great privilege actually when people come to me for this, because I know how difficult it was to get to that point of reaching out for help. I mean, it's this whole thing is about erasing shame, and the shame that builds up in someone who either they don't feel good about themselves, or they got found out and they're on the brink of like disaster in their life, and whether it's shame about losing their marriage or shame about losing their job, like there's so much shame wrapped up in this that it is difficult to reach out to a sex addiction therapist like myself. But when they do, I tell them, good for you. Good for you. I'm proud of you for actually reaching out and conquering or overcoming your shame enough to do this. And what I try to do is, number one, I try to create a very, very safe environment for them. So I tell them, look, I know what it's like to have sexual addiction tendencies myself. And I also know what it's like to be betrayed by someone who has a sex addiction. So I know both sides, and the healing that I received from friends, from God, from other places, has allowed me to give you a safe, contained environment where you don't feel judged by me. And from there, like the training that I received allows me to provide structured steps for them to walk through, so that the patterns that got them to the point of being addicted to sex, we kind of undo those patterns and create patterns in a different direction that they actually want for themselves. It could be a real lengthy process. It's definitely not a quick fix. Some people think that they'd be overcoming their addiction in like a couple months max, but it's actually, realistically, it's probably more, at least a year to maybe a year to 5 years, maybe.
Okay.
So it's a real investment of time and money to do that. But for those who are really wanting to do that, that the structure is there.
Yeah, I've gone to counseling myself, and I know at certain seasons of my life, they usually have me do a commitment of 10 sessions.
Yes.
To address, I guess, a smaller issue, but it's helpful to know how much time it will take to work on that, and not expect it to happen in a couple months and feel like you're so bad.
Yeah, and their expectations are dashed too. It's like, oh, I thought I was going to kick this habit, but it's a long process.
Wow. How as we're wrapping up, what would you say to our viewers and listeners who are struggling with sex and shame?
That I feel their pain. I feel their pain, and I carry no judgmental attitude towards them at all. In fact, I have a lot of compassion, even for those who, the ones who feel like they are the worst, like dregs of humanity. They may not believe it, but I find that they have tremendous, infinite value. And I'm always looking for some opportunities to be able to share that with them, and that there's hope. I don't think hope comes in snapping your fingers and just wishing it away, but I think hope comes with being able to confront your shame, being able to expose it and just kind of put it out on the table and say, let's take a look at it, and trying to figure out what we can do step by step to conquer this shame. And really, DJ, one of the professors in my training modules, he said that I think it was Dr. Ken Adams. He said, sex addiction, it is about the sex, and it's also not about the sex. It's what we're really talking about is, can you accept yourself? Can you present yourself as honestly as you can? Like, can you present yourself as you are? Those people who cannot present themselves as they are to peers or to parents or to even to themselves, they get flooded with the shame of being themselves. And that shame drives us to alcohol, drives us to sex, to gambling, to video games, anything to just kind of mask that horrible feeling. But for those, who are going to do like sex addiction treatment, yes, we're talking about the sex, but we're also talking about who are you and what's so bad about you that you are so ashamed of yourself. And are there other options, for healing that image of yourself? Are there ways for you to value yourself and therefore be able to present yourself as is to people and to accept their reaction to you? Because not everyone's going to like you, and that's just a fact. Not everyone's going to like you, but can you accept that there will be people who like you and some people who don't? And can you thrive in the areas where you are in a safe environment? And can you cope with the environments that you're not? But what we're really talking about is, can you know yourself and love yourself, and so that the shame gets decreased about who you are, and therefore the shame being decreased provides less fuel for any sort of addictions to take place, moving forward. So I would want to tell that to the viewers and to the listeners that I'd love to engage in an honest conversation with them about who they are and what their shameful feelings drive them towards, and what other options there might be to be able to live your life in a way that can provide a new legacy for you.
Yeah. Thank you for that kind word and invitation. And it's taking that first step to step out of that darkness and that bondage of shame to find one person that you can begin having that conversation with.
Yeah, you've got to overcome.
That person will lend you a hand to help you out.
That's right. The overcoming the denial is the first part.
Very good. Now, you help people professionally through your counseling practice, but you also help people personally. You're a podcaster, as we are. Yeah. And so tell us about your podcast. It's called The Same Boat.
The Same Boat. That's right. Yeah. It's a podcast that I am in love with, just because the stories that people present on the podcast are just they're healing for a lot of people. They're saying the things that a lot of people are afraid to talk about, and they're verbalizing some of the angst that a lot of people out there have not yet been able to verbalize. And it's called The Same Boat because I just want people to know that that they're not alone in this life journey, that there are people who are just like them. Maybe their situation is not exactly the same, but how they interpret situations and how they feel about themselves is very, very universal. And this podcast is not for those who are rich in faith, but rather this is for people who are poor in faith. And I think that kind of speaks to the majority of us. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, but it's for those who are poor in faith, and yet, even though they are poor in faith, God breaks through, and He shows His immense grace towards them, and that's where the healing truly takes place, when they can really receive that grace from God despite their poor faith.
Yeah, those are really powerful stories. I've been trying to think how to describe it. It's kind of like The Moth, but in an interview style, and very poignant and very heart-touching. And it's inspired me to step out of some of my own issues and start working on them. So it's given me courage. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Okay, we'll add a link in the show notes to that podcast. Yep. What's the best website for people to connect with you? If they want to ask a question or
I'm in the middle of migrating my website. It still works. You can find me at roykimtherapy.com. But soon, and maybe in about maybe a week or so, it'll migrate over to newlegacycounseling.com. That's the name of my practice.
Great, very good. Well, Roy, thank you for being with us on Erasing Shame. And for our audience, we would love for you to subscribe on YouTube or iTunes or other podcatchers at erasingshame.com, and like our Facebook page. And your help in sharing this podcast with others will be of tremendous help. We don't have a budget. We don't have a staff. We're just trying to help people out of our gratitude for how we've experienced healing and getting out of shame. So thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Roy. Blessings.
Thanks, TJ. Bye.
Bye.